Greetings and salutations. This is Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores the arts and cultural production. I'm Paula Blair, and I'm really pleased to be joined this time by artist researcher Katrina Sheena Smyth. I caught up with Katrina in the doctoral hub in the Belfast campus of Ulster University, the building many of us know as the Art College, where Katrina is undertaking her PhD. Before we hear about Katrina's work, a massive thank you to our members on patreon.com/avcultures for your continued support. If you also feel you can help, I'll be back with more details at the end, and for now, do enjoy my chat with Katrina. It was so lovely to catch up with her.
Hello, I'm Katrina Sheena Smyth. I am a researcher, artist based in Belfast.
So Katrina, we've known each other for a while now. Yeah, I think it was partly through Be Beyond, but I think you had reached out to me because of some research interests of mine, and now I'm reaching out to you. So
I know.
Talk to me about yours.
It's quite funny because even before you got in touch about the podcast series, some of the things that we'd done, looking at language and documentation and live art, that's been resonating, and I've been thinking about it. It's coming when I'm working through things. I'm like, yeah. So it's quite nice that you did get in touch, because it's maybe something we could even talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
It's things that I've been thinking about.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk first then about your PhD research at the moment, because that's your current thing. And maybe then from there we'll spread out into all the other areas.
Yeah, it's kind of like my life at the minute, PhD, which is great. It's now in third year, so I've just really begun the third year of the project, third and final year. I guess at this point you're like, okay, what's the 50 words that you can summarise your thesis in? The elevator pitch. And I was kind of thinking about that while after you contacted me. I was like, okay, maybe I should have a pitch that I can describe what I'm doing in 50 words. But it's actually, it's still in process, and I don't know if that would work. It's an ongoing kind of collaborative piece that's unfolding as, and it will do, and that's the point in the work. So I don't know if that will do it justice by reducing it into 50 words. The thesis itself was in response to a topic set out by my two supervisors, Dan Shipsides and Dr. Aisling O'Byrne. They're both researcher artists. Really amazing supervisory team. So the topic itself is called Unorthodox Methods of Spatial Inquiry Within Contemporary Art. So my way into that was, especially with the unorthodox, thinking about what that is. I went into that through personal and private curiosities or interests into meditation. So things that I've been practicing, meditation and yoga since I was about 17. And this kind of way of experiencing directly yourself and your breath and the world around as something different, and how that maybe can be part of a methodology or of a way of learning and engaging with the world, with space. And so there are some artists that work directly with meditation or with those sort of techniques. Another thing then was, this being a fully written thesis, and it's something that I've maybe up until that point had not really, I'd always used art, I'd always worked with art methods and created as a way of developing some sort of understanding, and the language always came second. And so this was a big challenge with this thesis, especially being dyslexic and always having an issue with language growing up. And that challenge at the start has actually, I don't see it so much as a challenge anymore. And it's not like this thesis is in no way about dyslexia or anything like that, but it's definitely about language and how we articulate experience, how we can generate these words, these word bodies, is drawing on Deleuze and Guattari, and thinking about language differently. And so this is part of the methodology that I'm looking at. So the fact that I'm doing a fully written thesis and it's not practice-based in a sense, within the category of the university, it's a fully written thesis. It still has definitely got, for me, a feeling of being practice-based. and working with different methodologies and working with language and this more collaborative way of working with others and space and practice, because I still do have my meditation practice, and that's, for me, part of that way of developing these things that I'm thinking about and working with and discussing with others. So, unorthodox methods of spatial inquiry, the logistics of the thesis itself. I've already said it's collaborative, and by that I mean I'm working directly with 3 art practitioners based quite locally, situated locally. One's based in Dublin, another is based in Belfast, and the third is based between Belfast and Scotland. And then I'm working with one Zen practitioner who's based between Belfast and Dublin, but is part of an organisation that's just across the road from the university. It's quite established. I think it's been established from around the late 70s. This collaboration, it's a really big part of the thesis, and it's an ongoing collaboration, so it's not just the one meeting with these artists and practitioner. There's a few, and it's where we meet up every few months, or we're sending emails back and forth, or sending videos or something to look at or something to discuss and open. In this sense, it's, I guess, thinking about not only how artists are engaging with space and these artistic processes and agency within that, but also how I'm positioning myself within this kind of academic institution as a researcher, and how I'm engaging with this kind of data or case study or material, and not having this kind of position as hierarchy or binary, but actually shifting that and hopefully creating a lot more space for things to emerge rather than me kind of just dictating the way things should go. So in that sense, the thesis is quite open, especially at the start. I'm thinking, where is this going to go? I've got some sort of framework and there's parameters, but at the same time, it's where the artists are going to take it as well, and the practitioner, what discussions are going to arise, what things are going to happen, and that's part of it, and seeing where that goes. So yeah, at the minute, that's why I'm finding it. There's some key things that have emerged and erupted, and it's really fascinating, and it's quite thrilling to see that happening. And at the same time, there's this uncertainty and this unease of not really knowing where it's going and if things are starting to make sense. Yeah, so at the minute, I find it hard to restrict exactly what's happening, but there is key things that are starting to happen that we can maybe talk about.
Yeah, great. It sounds very reflective then of performance art practice anyway, because of that contingency. You don't quite know what's going to kick off or when, or what you might do yourself when you're performing, or or what other performers are going to do. It sounds like it's more like a theoretical version of that in a way. It's just really fascinating.
Yeah, I think the process and methodology is the main part of this thesis. It's thinking about creative methods, creative processes within art practice and also within research practice, and how these kind of cross over and overlap, and what we can learn whenever things start to merge. I'm looking at things like process philosophy, Alfred North Whitehead, and ideas of becoming and rhizomatic kind of eruptions like Deleuze and Guattari. That things are starting in the middle rather than having this linear beginning and end. And also thinking about differences, and maybe we'll talk about that a bit more, and this idea of difference, not as something that's sitting on a binary, but something that's, just a different kind of way of working or thinking, and not that one's better than the other or comparing one to another, but just thinking in difference, which is drawing on Donna Haraway and Karen Barad, Iris van der Dun, those sort of new materialist thinkers or post-humanist.
Things have really moved on since your MA work.
It has, but there's still echoes.
Rooted in that, yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
I think because when I first started the thesis, actually, I was talking about, I'd came to Dan and I was thinking, well, this is my idea, and I'm thinking about material, and I think I'd mentioned the double slit experiment. I definitely had mentioned the double slit experiment, because he was like, oh, you must know Karen Barad then, and I was like, what? He's like, new materialism. I was like, no, I'll need to look that up. So I went home and I looked it up, and I was just like, oh my God, that. I was just amazed that all of this research around me is happening, and I'm kind of making work or thinking about these theories and not realising that there's this whole school of thought that's happening at the minute. I guess for me it was thinking about Deleuze, but then also thinking about the double slit experiment and agency, material kind of agency. So yeah, it has. And this idea of watching and measuring, I think that's always been a big thing, because it is performance art that we were working in. And this idea of somebody, watching you, especially within the university, your lecturers are watching you, they're marking you, they're critiquing you. And so how does that affect the performance? Even the camera being there, whenever you're getting a photograph taken of your performance, you know it's there. You're going to change your body. Some people might make images for the camera, so that's changing that whole performance and what happens then. And so these are kind of ideas in terms of the art, in an art context, similar to ideas that are maybe, with Barad specifically, looking at the Niels Bohr's Copenhagen experiment, where you're looking at how matter changes when it's observed, how material, how atoms, which we're all made of, how atoms are changing whether or not we observe it or not, and how that then makes different patterns. All of that was happening during the Masters, but I wasn't aware, I don't think, at the time.
Yeah, you weren't tapping into the theory side of it, but you were experimenting in a bodily way with those ideas, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah, experiencing it, I guess.
Yeah, living it, being it, performing it.
And I think a big thing with us, the collaboration that we done, where we were both performing in a sense, and I was maybe engaging with the space and the building, and you were kind of responding with language and flow of language and words, and just seeing where that will go. And this kind of idea of documenting and recording, this whole thesis that I'm writing is language, and it's going to exist as a kind of bound book or on the internet. It's talking about process, it's talking about method and experiential, kind of direct experience. So how do you begin to work with language in a way that doesn't limit that or reduce it? That's when I was starting to think about what you were doing and these more creative ways of working with language, and especially with critique and how we compare people or compare ways of working, and this almost positioning one against another, again this binary way of that's kind of entrenched within art even, and within art within institution or art in university context, art crits.
Yeah, and it was fascinating. I mean, I think what we ended up doing, it felt like it was taking language out for a walk in a way and letting it go free off the leash. And you were pushing boundaries in other ways, and I was, I suppose, working within boundaries, but not in a conventional way, maybe. I'm not sure how to put it. I don't know. We need to ask Jackie Wiley, because she saw it from the outside. So yeah, it's just fascinating to hear you talk about your PhD, and you can see the roots back to what you were experimenting with back then as well in 2014. And before.
It's even funny because I was thinking about this, and I was in my BA in second year, I was looking at ripples, I was looking at water and waves, and then I've just kind of landed on this, at the minute I'm looking at diffractive methodologies, looking at Donald Haraway uses the metaphor of the wave, whenever we're thinking about waves of difference rather than the particle, like this kind of straight linear way of working and working with differences. And it's kind of using this metaphor as wave, and I'm like, oh yeah. And I'm interested in, I guess it's probably a completely different thing that I was interested in at the time. Although I was still interested in Zen or Buddhism, I think, at that time. So there is these little, when you're just sitting thinking and it pops into your head, oh yeah, maybe I was. It's funny how it all comes together, and it's not like it's ending now, it's just going to keep going.
Oh yeah, it doesn't end. A PhD just stops, it doesn't end.
I'm actually very, very lucky, I think, to be studying this though, because it's fascinating. And the only one thing that I'm kind of concerned with at the minute is, I feel like all of this work that I'm doing, I don't want to become so enclosed in it. It's important that I'm looking at methodologies that are about ethics and, socially just pedagogies, and I find that I'm working at my desk so much. It's like, well, how am I being part of this? But then you kind of think about this kind of macro impact. Does it have to be a macro impact? Do you need to be out at the picket line? And it's hard to know how you're making a difference or how you're working with some of these concepts and methods, and where it sits in the outside world, where it sits outside of academia, outside the ivory tower. But at the same time, it has only been 2 years, and I guess it's important that I'm reading and learning and discussing, and and then who knows what happens after the PhD.
It's important not to get overwhelmed, because there's nothing like doing a PhD to show you how much you don't know. You'll, even when you come to the end of it, you'll find a whole other strain of thought that you hadn't heard of yet that you might have been relevant, and it never stops happening.
It's down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. In a way, you do have to set those parameters, and it's interesting to think about orthodoxy and space. When you say those words, all I can think about is you climbing out the window in the old Orpheus building and the security guard running over and shutting down what was happening during one of our performances. And that's the image I keep going back to, because within the institution, what is orthodox, but then in the real world, is there a different way of measuring what's orthodox or permitted or allowed to happen? And so your own PhD is questioning these things, but it's also has to be corralled by them.
Yeah, it's part of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting tension to have. There's things coexisting but not quite comfortably to explore.
And I think that's part, there's part of this thesis. I am looking at anarchy, and Emma Goldman is one person that I'm thinking about how you can exist within this institution and within as part of that. But I don't think it's this is where I have existential crises.
Yeah.
This is where you start to break things down so much that you like, what is the point in anything, But that hasn't happened that much, thankfully, about 3 or 4 times for me. I think it's like art for me, that's where art comes in, and as a way of erupting or creating cracks, in this kind of authoritative or orthodox way of this is the way things are done, and this is the only way things are done. And especially within institutions or within organisations that have that authority or have that power. And so then art can become a way of navigating or creating cracks, creating space to question and reevaluate or revisit these ways of working that are maybe, could be worked differently. So that's where I'm at. And a big part of this then is measurement. And for me, working with these artists and these practitioners, especially with the thing that I'm interested in with Zen and with art process, how do we articulate what we're doing when we're creating work, especially like not even performance but process-based work, and does it need to be articulated? Is there ways of articulating it that maybe create more space for other interpretations or other considerations? And then also with Zen, the thing that I'm sitting with at the minute is language for Zen is a practice. There's the koan, there's Renzai practice that work with language in koans, and this kind of language then becomes a form, and how we sit with that form or meditate with that form, and not that it's so literal. So it's kind of questioning the structures of language and thinking about that differently in terms of experience, in terms of sitting and just being with something. And then also another school, which is Soto-sen, which is the school that I'm collaborating with, that's completely about just sitting. It's not about language, even though there's a historical, texts, and it's a very rich body of language that supports this practice. The school would consider language as not really as another form, and it's about letting go of form and just sitting with breath and space and with body. And so it's a conundrum, and it's potentially the person that I'm working with, the Zen practitioner, had said, your thesis sounds like a koan in itself. It's how I navigate and work with language in a way that is open, and that's something that has been, I think, working with the methodologies in the practice. how language then comes into play. Like there's a whole chapter on language, on how to collaborate maybe with language, how other theorists or artists are engaging with language in their practice differently and creatively, and auto-ethnographical kind of ways or approaches, or thinking of language as a material, thinking of, this thesis, this book as an object, as part of that, but not as the end product, not as something that's set in stone even. And it's quite nice, the Deleuze, What is Philosophy, I think it's in, where you're talking about the book as a cog, as part, that you might get something from the book and you might not, that it's not something that should be read literally, and it can open up spaces for other things. So that's the way I'm kind of thinking about the thesis as well, that it's, even though we're told to have this direct, authoritative way of speaking about our work because we're the specialists and we should know exactly what we're talking about, and I'm seeing this more as a collaboration, and the person that's going to be reading it is also collaborating in that research in a sense, because they're taking what they interpret, or they're bringing their own experiences with them to the reading of the book and to the reading of the pages. So it's not as black and white.
It sounds like facilitation that you're doing as much as authorship in a way, because you're bringing the elements together to bring it about, or let it happen, let it do this. It's reminded me quite a bit of Alistair MacLennan's practice. I've just been collaborating on a book about him, so I've been mired in this for a lot of the year. When he's doing performance, it's really he's bringing together elements and putting them in positions where they can start to do their own thing within what he's doing. So it sounds in a way a bit like that. You're bringing all together these people, these ideas, and letting them germinate in a way. I suppose controlling it to an extent, but not controlling it so much that you're controlling the outcome, as it were, but you're just seeing what happens organically, but again within reason, by nudging it at the sides. Because you still need it to be something. Yeah,
and even in the sense of controlling the outcome, are you actually in control of that outcome ever?
Exactly.
Or is it just our perception of that, so it's, definitely thinking about perception, and Alistair MacLennan's definitely a big inspiration, or, there's been chats that I've had with Alistair as well that are, resonate completely with the approaches and the methods that I'm working with. So this idea of setting parameters, of creating this space or setting up this space and then being part of that, and not being the person in complete control, but being open to things happening and seeing and being attentive, being aware maybe of little synchronicities or chance or where things will go.
I think the difficulty for you is then having to knit together into something that can become a doctorate from the institution's point of view, in a way, because there's a specific idea of what an arts humanities PhD should be, and it's quite interesting to tease that, actually, to push that boundary as well. So it's another space that perhaps you're being quite unorthodox in as well, is just pushing at what should that be, what can that be, how do you approach it?
One of the things that has emerged from this research and from attending different conferences like New Materialist Conference, it's an international conference, and also Qualitative Inquiry, so the European Congress of Qualitative Inquiry and the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. Just speaking with others, and what's emerged then is this concept of slow scholarship, of slow philosophy, slow ontology. It resonates so much with Zen approaches and practice and meditation, just sitting with things and being attentive, being open. Then also, this just even listening, and then also the artistic processes, and just having this collaborative way of working with the material and the material intelligence and seeing what happens. And that's something that's happening throughout the practitioners that I'm working with, that's happening differently within their own practice. I think that's a massive part now of the thesis, and how it kind of addresses, I guess, this contentious area of what a thesis is, and how we discuss, how we write about artistic processes, but also then the position of myself as a researcher, and what is asked from me, what sort of hoops I need to jump, and what's happening in this environment that I'm part of, outside of, not exactly outside of the thesis, but just as another part of the thesis, but not so theory-based. It's more my experience of working within the institution and seeing things change and things becoming, marketalized. So that's, I think, addressing and starting to bring, at the start I was looking at new materialism, and it's still definitely part of that in terms of diffractive methodology, but then there's this whole other thing that's happening with slow scholarship, and I think that's where things are starting to tease and become part of. And the fact that I'm able to spend the 2 or 3 years with these art practitioners and just develop a relationship and discussions on their practice and their approaches to making, and not just have this one-off meeting and I'm like, okay, thank you, got what I wanted, that it is a bit more open and seeing where things go, and there's something quite lovely in that I am able to spend time.
You can build a human relationship as well as theorise it. They can coexist, they don't have to be separate entities, and they can flow into each other.
I don't know if we want to talk a bit more about slow scholarship, or if it's something...
If you're happy to, yeah. This was something that was really come into prominence when I was really on my way out of academia. It had really exploded in about 2016 in popularity. The interest in it certainly had really come about. So you're probably a lot more knowledgeable about this than I would be now.
When I first started, when I went to the first conference on new materialism, and I'd got what the next conference was going to be about, and it's based on higher education. It's taking place in Cape Town in December. One of the streams of research is slow scholarship. I guess it's looking at the neoliberal kind of university model, and how this model is detrimental, how this corporate kind of university and corporate model is, I guess, I'm still trying to figure this out. With this thesis, there was an interest in Marxist theory, and this idea of the commodification of material, or not even of material, of human, of bodies, and Hannah Arkwright and the human condition, and thinking about then, okay, not just thinking about all bodies, so human, animal, plant or ecosystems, materials, matter, and how we create this. See, to be honest, this is something that I'm writing at the minute. So I'm writing about slow scholarship as a paper, and I'm starting to bring in the things that have been discussed with the artists. Some of the artists are discussing this actually, because each of the art practitioners that I'm working with are also have been involved or still are with pedagogy practice, and so it's a big part of their work. And it's going to come in, it's going to filter into their work in some way. So there's one artist in particular who's considering how this kind of more neoliberal way of working and this kind of urgency to produce and to tick targets and to measure. Measurement again is the big thing, and I think that's where it's starting to link or make connections with the research that I'm doing, this idea of measurement, and how if we're working with art-based methods that are maybe going to emerge differently if there's not such a tight, productive, urgent way of working, this kind of commodity of art, commodity of research and of producing. And what happens then if we are able to slow, and I think not slow as in stop making, or take longer to make something, but just slowing down in terms of listening, in terms of just sitting with the research or sitting with the material or with people, and allowing that space for moments of chance or of synchronicity or of things to happen. I think it's important in art as well. How do you measure how somebody is working? What's when we do measure, I'm just talking in riddles now. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, it's important. Like how do you measure what success means? For example, how do you qualify what's good and what's not good? Those are very basic questions. So it's a question of value in that sense, but also the time to think is so undervalued, and I think for what I get from slow scholarship is it's trying to reclaim that. It's trying to reclaim the value of time to think about things and to just let things be and become, as you say. That was certainly something I was getting frustrated about when I was still in academia. Was so much of my working day was me sitting with my hands propping up my chin going, wondering about things, thinking things through. And that's not considered work because you don't look like you're hammering stuff out on a keyboard. That looks like work, even though it's probably less productive because you're not really doing anything that will end up being something of value. You're just looking like you're doing something. So I think there's that, and I think from what we've been talking about, this whole conversation, there's been such a long gestation of your ideas, and that's really the slowness of that process. And it's slowness is not a negative. This is actually a really positive thing where you have needed that time really for those ideas to come into language for you, it seems like, because you were embodying them, performing them, making gestures of them.
Yeah.
And now you're at a point where you're reading around and you're putting things into words.
Totally.
There's so much pressure for scholars to be internationally super academics. Everything's ramped up.
Yeah.
And it feels a bit like, in all the reality TV shows where it has to be the biggest, the best, the strongest, the hardest, the most phenomenal thing ever, and it has to top itself every year. It just feels like that all the time.
But it kind of echoes with the arts, this idea of the spectacle and of things having to be this big, extravagant kind of thing that happens. And what about these little kind of subtle movements and engaged collaborations that are maybe intangible or that are maybe not as showbiz?
Because it's all knowledge generation. It's all knowledge gathering and generation and dissemination. It's all sharing of ideas. But it's just how much is any of it recognised in academia? How much of it is legitimate? It's that question of it being legitimate, being permissible. So it's really just good to shake that up a bit.
Yeah, and also I think another thing is, the ethics and being accountable, or being that we're not just creating this work that exists in an institution, and even people maybe outside of this institution are able to access the work that's being discussed, because a lot of the time it's Athens, for instance, that you have to be part of this system to read and to learn. And so that's another thing that I'm quite aware of and quite wary of is, who is this research for? And is it making any sort of difference, or is it? And I know that this doesn't just exist in the university, because I'm engaging with artists and there's things happening outside of it, but it's still, I can see how very easy it would be to just get entangled in that whole enclosed. Well, that was lovely. An ending.
No, it's really good to hear about what you're doing now. I mean, you have come up before, because when I talked to Jacqueline Wiley, you came up a bit then, and it's been really nice to catch up, because there was a project I was doing earlier this year where I went back and read about our Between Frames project, because it just felt like I was picking up threads from that, because I've gone in a way the opposite way to you, where I've sort of left academia behind and I'm exploring the more creative possibilities of things and trying to write in a different way, in a freer way, but still trying to find meaning, I guess, just not academicize it to death. And that project and what we did together in that, I don't know, there was just something about it that I feel like I want to circle back to, because I feel like there's unfinished business there.
And that's lovely. I think that's, part of it, that it's not just something that existed in that time, that it's something that is entangled with us still now, that it's not something that just exists in this linear path of back there and it's done, but actually it's part of us still. It resonates. How we remember that or revisit that in different ways with different experience and new knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, we can look across the road and see where there used to be a building that project happened in. It's interesting to tread old ground, and again to think about space and ideas around legitimacy and things. There's something in there that maybe I feel like in another maybe 5 years we can come back and tease it out a bit more.
For sure, yeah. It's funny because even though this is a 3-year thesis, a 3-year PhD, it's kind of like there's so much more, there's so much more. Like it could easily be a 5-year project, or more.
I mean, that's the thing, it's the arbitrariness of the 3-year funding period, and that a PhD should be 3 years. I mean, actually, it probably would be better if it was closer to 5. I know certainly I did mine in 3 years, but then it was another 2 years to do the book project. And really, even that, it's not finished because that was just the stopping point when I sent it to the publisher. Because especially when you're doing something really contemporary and in the moment, which is what you're doing, this is constant changing ground that you're working with. It doesn't end. You just have to stop at some point because you could do it forever. It's the archive fever. There's so many fascinating things going on there, and it is that idea of what do we owe each other, you know, by pushing each other to work so hard and produce so much. We're just overwhelming each other, and that's not good either. So it feels like hopefully a nice message that you can do something really valid, and it doesn't have to be massive, it doesn't have to be world changing, but it's there and it's important.
And it's something that can be picked up on as well, you know, after.
Yeah, and by anyone really who's inquisitive enough to carry it on. You know, it doesn't have to even end with the life of one person.
Yeah,
it can
definitely
be passed on. That's a whole other question, is ownership. And that collaborative nature of how you're working is really interesting. That's not new to you. You've been collaborating, I think, throughout your practice anyway.
I think so much more happens whenever we're working with others, but not just others. I think it's the perspective for me, and what happens whenever we're working together and seeing what, and not just together with each other as humans, but with the building or with the architecture or the ecosystems or the seasons, planetary happenings. So it's this idea that we're not just an internal person and everything else is outside of us, but actually what happens whenever we get down to subtler kind of exchanges or experience.
In a way, this sets us up nicely to, this isn't really over. I think maybe do another one of these another time.
Maybe just before the Viva.
Just give you a bit of practice. And then you can say, you don't even need to turn up to your Viva, just play them the recording. Instead of giving them a defence.
I would love that, actually. Yeah.
Katrina, thank you so much for taking the time, because this is a busy period for you, so I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
It's been lovely.
Yeah, hopefully it helps.
And it's been really helpful, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk to you about your own practice as well, but I think that's a good excuse to maybe talk again another time.
Yeah.
Awesome. If you're up for
I'd love that. 100%, yes.
Great. Well, good luck with your PhD.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Audiovisual Cultures with special guest Katrina Sheena Smyth. This episode was hosted, recorded, edited and produced by Paula Blair. The music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under a Creative Commons non-commercial license, and is available for download from ccmixter.org. Episodes release every other Wednesday. If you like what I do and can help fund production and distribution, please make regular donations via liberapay.com/PEA Blair or one-off payments to paypal.me/PEA Blair. Be part of the conversation with AV Cultures Pod on Instagram and AV Cultures on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much for listening. Catch you next time.